Hey, Kyler here. Our aim for this show is to throw a dart right in the bullseye of what it looks like to leverage every opportunity that life throws at us. I hope you find value in today's episode.
Welcome back to the Leverage Life Show. We are starting a new 8-week series called the Diagnostic. The reason we've called it that is because we want to run a diagnostic test on 8 questions every single estate plan should be able to answer right off the top of your head. 8 questions right at the heart. These are questions your wealth transfer plan needs to be able to answer right here, right now. And if any of these questions maybe bring some hesitation in your mind, it's a good time to consult the people and the key players in your life to help you answer those questions. So today we're driving a nail right on the head and hitting it with our hammer of what it looks like to calculate a taxable estate exposure. And that's the first question we have to answer, because if I were to ask you and we were to sit down with you like we do in any of our client meetings, as we are often working with people who are taxable, do you know the current number of estate tax exposure in your personal portfolio and your personal estate? And if we're not confident on that number, that's a question we have to figure out right here and right now, because you cannot plan around a number that's never been calculated. You cannot plan around a number that has never been calculated. And for many of our clients who are real estate investors and moguls, and for business owners, they know their business financials and the cap rates of their properties right off the top of their head. But do you know your taxable number right off the top of your head? And here's the problem and why we need to address it. Because if we don't know that number is going to get passed directly to those who inherit the estate, and they're going to have a headache. And that number is due 9 months to the IRS. And if that hasn't been properly accounted for, things are getting sold, usually under pressure, usually at a discount. And that's why it is so crucial in a matter of stewardship and a matter of having this conversation to answer that question now. So what is the tax number associated with your estate? What is the estate tax exposure? And that's what we're going to dive into today.
Kord, I'm really excited about this series because, as you know me, I am somebody that really likes to know details, and I like to have structure and organization, have a plan, so that way we can really just kind of stress test, the future projections of what somebody's worth and really get a good idea of, where do we need to go with things, and then what problem do we need to solve? We've talked about that many times before. We keep saying over and over and over again, you can hear it a million times, but we're not trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist. That is one of the foundational things that we talk about on a daily basis with people that we work with, or referral partners, CFPs, estate planning attorneys. And it's true because, for everybody, they have different problems. And for this episode specifically, obviously, we're talking about people that are taxable. Now, this is not going to include a lot of people. Right. So with 2026, the current threshold for individuals, 15 million, for 30 million for married couples. So that is a ton of people that's going to exclude. However, we always put this as a tag on that statement saying laws can change. And we always have to be able to kind of keep that in mind, because I think it's wise, it's prudent to be able to see, hey, what is your potential estate tax exposure as of the current moment with current laws? But if things change and let's say those numbers go down, and that does include a lot more people, of course, we have to have that initial conversation with those people, those new people, but we need to then have that second conversation is like, hey, let's stress test this against other types of scenarios to see what that could change in your taxable estate. And so that's really the idea for this episode, of course. And I mentioned, the 15 million for individuals, 30 million for married couples. And here in just a little bit, Kord, I want to actually run an example of potentially what this conversation could look like when we actually have this with people. I think that would be a good thing to do. And there's some different calculators you can find online, of course. But we have kind of an internal tool that we'll use, and I will say too as well. We always talk about collaborating with people, so these are things that we will run kind of on the front end. But we have people on our team. We have really, really good estate planning attorneys that we will collaborate with and say, hey, this is kind of like what we're thinking. Give us your thoughts. What do we need to kind of do to make sure that we're having these conversations the right way? How can we educate these people? How can we bring you into the conversation, bring them into this to make sure that we are really collaborating at this at a high level? I say a high level with the people working with that are on our team, but then we do have to bring it down to the level of the client, potentially if they don't want to talk at a high level too. But I think it's good to
Mhm.
be able to have the ability to have different types of conversations at different levels, but still be talking about the same thing. And so, one thing I do want to mention, Cord, though, too, is one thing that I think that people don't take into account a lot of is just appreciation of estates. And so you need to consider that as well. Let's say it's somebody that's younger, in their 40s, and they're crushing it. Let's say they've got a, $15 million estate. They're married. So, right, like they're not going to be at that threshold yet. But in 20 years, they're 60, 65, pushing 70. I bet you if they own a business, they're going to have different real estate investments they're going to do. They're going to have 401ks, different investable assets. Their estate is going to grow. I would assume it would be. So we need to take into account future appreciation of someone's estate. And it kind of goes back to the thought of just kind of stress testing scenarios and saying, hey, this is where you're at right now, but we need to be planning for the future to where you're potentially going to be at. And so that's where a lot of times the conversation of life insurance comes in, because if there is a gap in the liquidity, if you will, on your taxable estate versus like what you have in illiquid assets, then that could be a problem.
Mhm.
If you're going to have a gap there and there's going to be a liquidity issue, you don't want to have your family have to pay off or sell off a business, sell off real estate to actually pay the IRS. And so this is where the conversation of life insurance comes in as a tool, as an asset, as a vehicle to create liquidity. And that is going to be one of the foundational things that we talk about with people, because when you talk about life insurance with most people, they're going to think of it in kind of maybe some sleazy ways of what people that they're going to get calls all the time from life insurance agents saying like, hey, you need this term policy or whatever. It's like, no, we're not trying to solve that. We're trying to
Amen.
solve the liquidity problem, and the way that we do that is a lot of times with very large cash value life insurance policies, and that's going to be the thing that's going to be the vehicle that's going to be able to provide that liquidity for our clients and in the time that they actually need it the most.
There's a lot of good stuff in there, Kyler. I think you were just spitting there for for a few minutes.
I get
Um,
excited about this stuff, so
I
I'm just
know, I
gonna
know.
like
You're
shoot from the
such
hip sometimes.
a detailed, structured mind. It's just fun to watch it. It's fun to see the calculator and spreadsheet, in your mind start
Oh
to
my
come out.
goodness.
um, Let me highlight a matter of stewardship that you had brought up in our first meetings with our prospective clients. We're pretty selective with who we work with. This is one of the conversations that comes up, and most of the time, maybe that taxable threshold has not been hit yet, especially if they're in their
Mm,
30s and 40s. But here's what I like to do. I like to think ahead because that's what good leaders do, and that's what a good matter of stewardship likes to think through. I like to think ahead till the age of 65 and 70 and calculate ahead of time. Okay, what projected taxes are we looking at with your estate? I know you're only at 10 million right now and you don't have an estate tax exposure. So technically if you pass away now, you're fine. But in 30 years, when you're 70, your projected net worth with all of the inflation and all of your real estate holdings and all of your business valuation, as those continue to grow, you're going to be getting hit with a $16 million tax bill that's due in 9 months because your estate might be worth 70 million. And here's the deal. If you wait till you're 70 to solve that problem, you can't solve that problem anymore. Your options have really shrunk and they've dwindled, and you might not even qualify for a life insurance policy at that point in time. But when you're 40 and you go ahead and put that policy in place when that problem doesn't technically exist yet, but it's going to exist, that is still solving a problem that exists within your estate. And I just call that good planning. And I call that good stewardship. And people don't just scrap their way to that level of wealth. They think ahead, they plan ahead, and it's a matter of stewardship. It's just like what you do with a real estate property. It's just like what you do with your business. You actively grow and think ahead and solve the future problems just as much as you put out fires today. That's what great leaders do. And that's all we're trying to do is we come alongside you and talk about your estate exposure and talk about these different things that actually need to be put in place. So I don't want you to be scared as we talk about, taxable estates or exposure or anything like that. And I also don't want us to avoid the conversation completely. That's the balance we're trying to do. I don't want people to be scared at like, oh, what's going to happen with my estate if I have this huge number that's due. But that doesn't give us a reason or an excuse to just completely avoid the conversation. We have to honestly account for current exposure and then tomorrow's growth right now in our planning. And then that's when the problems get exposed, the solution actually begins to make sense, and disasters are avoided. I think it's just a matter of stewardship. You cannot steward right now what you have not measured and thought through.
There's a lot of really good nuggets in what you just said, especially the stewardship aspect, Court. I mean, we want to come alongside people, and if you're listening to this and that you feel like you fall in this category of possibly being taxable, or you haven't had these conversations and stuff, of course, with people maybe in your circle. Just know, what you want. Anything you take away from this conversation, what we want to be able to do is to come alongside you to empower you with options, to empower you with choices, but in ultimately to help you steward your finances, your money in the best way possible, to have impact for your family, to have a lifelong legacy, but then also for your community at large, because we know um, people that are really in these types of scenarios, they are, of course, number one, just doing some really cool stuff, in general, whether it's business stuff or just life. But a lot of times these people tend to be, pretty generous. Like we want to be able to help you steward that in a very, very positive way. So, Court, I love everything you're saying on that. Really, really good nuggets in there. But let's kind of get a little bit more granular here and let's talk about, kind of a potential example. I talked about there's a lot of people that are not going to be taxable, but let's kind of sit down and let's pull some numbers a little bit. Let's run it through my calculator, through our calculator that we have. And like I said, there are different calculators that you can find online for this stuff as well. So it's not like what we're using is, super, super secretive. Like this stuff is publicly available knowledge. It's just getting the right tools together to get some, to get some solid information. So, give me just a second here. Let me pull up my calculator here. And so let's go through a couple numbers. I went ahead, I was just kind of playing around with this earlier on a situation that we had. And so I'm going to I tweaked some of the numbers to make it, not so specific to the person that we were talking about. But let's pull this up. So let's kind of use a round easy number. Let's say a client has a $50 million estate. Okay. Let's kind of break that down a little bit. And I should say too, when we get into numbers like this is probably not our very first conversation with a client. These are going to be topics of conversation we have as ongoing things, but a lot of times the first conversations are we want to get to know people, of course. It kind of just like see who they are and stuff. But anyways, let's run some numbers. So let's say a $50 million estate. Let's say real estate. They've got roughly $8 million in real estate, so they've done some investments. Investable accounts. Let's put down. They have, let's say 12 million in investable accounts. So they've really been investing hard with the money they've been making. Retirement accounts, they've been putting money aside. Let's put 6 million there. Business interests, let's say this person has a pretty solid business. Let's say their shares 18 million. Okay. They've got about 3 million in life insurance, cash in the bank. Let's put 2 million other assets. Let's just put 1 million, could be anything from jewelry, cars, anything like that. Let's put in some liabilities and debts. Let's put 2.5 charitable. Let's go ahead and say they've already done 500,000 there. prior taxable gifts. Let's put 2 million. So let's say, so all these things, there's different ways that you calculate this, but essentially you're looking at how much of your true assets you have, and then, subtracting like liabilities and debts. And then of course, we've got different things like charitable contributions, prior tax gifts. Those things matter because when we talk about the thresholds, if you've already given above, certain annual amount, then that anything above that annual amount is going to start taking down that taxable threshold. So okay, let's run these numbers. Let's hit calculate exposure. All right, let's see here. So we've got a $50 million estate here, and then we're going to subtract the things we just talked about. Okay, so we're going to subtract the 2.5 and the 500,000. So taxable estate before exemption is 47 million. All right. So when we look at the federal exemption, okay, so I also didn't say this, but we put in here married couple. Okay. So that's going to be a 30 million threshold. Okay. So I put in here that they already had done 2 million of gifting, essentially, taxable gifts. That's going to reduce that threshold by $2 million. So their federal exemptions now at 28 million. Okay. As of 2026, like I said, we said laws can change. So their federal taxable estate is 19 million. So there's different, tiers, essentially, if you will, Kord, on, the tax rates, of course. But when you're talking about this scale, we can effectively just say it's like 40%. You know what I mean? It's anything like over millions, it's going to be 40%. So we're just going to say 40% here. So when you look at that, your federal estate tax is $7.6 million. All right. Um, that's a hefty tax liability. So $7.6 million to have to pay to the IRS is potentially problematic for a lot of clients. I mean, for families after a loved one passes away. So the question is that you have to be able to answer is like, where's that money going to come from?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a real question. And a lot of times what I will say when I sit down with people, I will literally say, like, my genuine concern here is that you have this estate tax exposure. You're going to have to pay $7 million. Your family's going to have to pay $7 million. That's a genuine concern. How is your family going to do that?
Mm-hmm.
How is that going to take place? Or sometimes I'll ask too, if they, of course, don't have the actual cash specifically, what asset are you going to sell? What asset is your family going to have to sell in order to pay this? Do you want your business to stay in the family? Do you want to keep that commercial building? Do you want to keep X? Do you want to keep Y? Right? If they have to, if the answer to paying that is having to sell something, that's a problem. That is the liquidity problem, the liquidity gap that we are looking to solve here with people that are taxable. So that, of course, ushers in the conversation of life insurance, because a high cash value life insurance policy is going to be able to provide the liquidity upon death for that family to pay that tax bill. And then the result of that is your family gets to keep the business. They get to keep the commercial real estate property. They get to keep X, Y, Z. So it's kind of pretty common sense in a lot of ways. But you just have to have the conversations. You have to have some of these numbers and just be transparent and like to actually show people, because a lot of times people don't realize kind of the situations they're in, and it's not to their fault by any means. Of course, they've been busy. They've been busy building a, you know, 8-figure business. So, these are just kind of the facts of the matter and the truth behind all this stuff. And we've got to be able to empower people to have choices, to be able to make the right choice for their family, for, like I said, ultimately their legacy, and of course how they want to be remembered once they're gone. So yeah, I think those, that's a good way to just kind of show the numbers really quick. But like I said, you can find these calculators online and stuff, but these are the things and these are the conversations that we're going to have with our clients.
It really is the difference between passing on a legacy or passing off a problem. And when you're really talking about what you have to sell, what you have to liquidate in order to come up with the dollars that are actually necessary, that's when the problem gets pretty personal.
Yes.
And that's where I want to leave with this action step today as we just calculated an exposure in real time. What is your number? Do you have a number? Maybe you don't right now, but maybe you will on a projected taxable estate. So that is the action step. You need to talk to somebody about it. You can call us. You can text show to 479-396-3528, or you could call up your CPA or your estate planner. And if they're worth their salt, which I imagine you're working with someone that is, they'll be able to do that really well. We're not going to pretend to be estate planners. They're going to calculate it to the dot and the iota of what's actually in your estate. But we can get some good rounded numbers. We can get really close. We can calculate it down, and then we can start to do our expertise, which is fund that liquidity and create that liquidity that's actually needed for your estate. Because we don't want you to pass off a problem. We don't want you to just have a hope that things work out well one day. We want you to have a concrete plan to transfer your wealth. And that's where we come in and structure it. That's your challenge for today. Calculate that number. And this is the first episode of our 8-week diagnostic series, 8 questions that every estate plan and wealth transfer plan should be able to answer. Come back next week for question number 2, and we'll see you next time.